Hello and welcome to Living and Learning. I'm your host, Karen Kugel, and today our episode is about the developmentally disabled. We're going to be talking about new models of care for developmentally disabled adults. And we have with us an expert guest who is the volunteers coordinator at the Wrentham Center for the Developmentally Disabled. That is right here in Wrentham, Massachusetts. And we're here to have her talk to us about her experiences there. Ingrid Arrigo-Grenon has well over 30 years of experience working with the developmentally disabled. And most of that has been at the Wrentham Center, but she has worked in other areas as well. I'm going to leave it to her to tell you about her particular experiences, but one thing that I think is especially interesting about her, which gives you a clue to something that we'll talk about a little bit later, she's actually an expert equestrian as well. And so I will leave it to her to talk about how that relates to some of the stories and new therapeutic approaches that she'll be talking about. So let me start, really, Ingrid, with asking you, how did you get into this field in the first place?
You know, it's a funny thing. I really didn't intend to get into the field at all. I wanted to go into strictly mental health. I graduated from college. I had a degree in psychology. And for my summer job, because it was in such close proximity, the next town, I thought, well, I'll get a job at Wrentham Developmental Center, and that'll just be my summer job. I really didn't want to work with the then called mentally retarded. I had a lot of misapprehensions, misconceptions growing up in the town next door, where people would say, my own parents would say, Ingrid, if you don't start behaving, we're going to send you to the state school.
Oh, wow.
When I was in grammar school, if I misbehaved, and unfortunately I sort of...
So you were a troublemaker.
I was a troublemaker.
It's hard to believe.
Actually, it ended up being good at the end, but they would threaten me and actually send me to the special ed class as a punishment.
As a form of punishment.
And the special ed class was in the basement.
Wow.
See how we fall prey to what our community and our society and even our family, believes and sort of teaches us and nurtures us, these misconceptions.
But yes. Yeah.
Anyway, it was going to be my summer job. That was 35 plus years ago. So
you don't look that old, but
let me tell you, my misconceptions got straightened out really quick, and I realized it's a wonderful population, and it was a very rewarding profession.
Great. So give us a hint as to why you stayed. What were the rewarding parts, or what were the misconceptions that you had?
I thought people would drool on me. Isn't that terrible? They're going to drool, and they're going to do this, they're going to do that. You're going to be attacked. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. And I realized that these people they're more like us than unlike us. Smiling, laughing, eye contact. It's all the same. And working with these folks, getting to know them, getting to help them through some really difficult times, because when I was hired in 1981, that was a real transitional period for the then Department of Mental Health, which is now the Department of Developmental Services. That was a transitional period, and we were clawing our way up from the previous bad several decades of institutional care in Massachusetts. And it was very rewarding to help nurture the population and get them through that transition period, which is great. These people are wonderful. They're people just like we are, and many of these folks have become great friends of mine.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, great friends.
So, Ingrid, when I was doing some background research for this, I found an astounding number, that there are actually 6 million people in the United States that are officially defined as having developmental disabilities. And you mentioned a little bit earlier something about the state of Massachusetts and the category of mental health versus developmental disabilities. I was hoping that you could give us some clarification on how those things are different, because I think many people lump them together.
We had some heroic reform occur here in Massachusetts in the mid-'70s. Prior to that, the Department of Mental Health was the Department of Mental Health was collectively the agency that dealt with people who had mental health challenges as well as those who were intellectually and developmentally challenged. And that's what brought about part of the heroic reform that we had in the mid-70s. At that time, institutions in this state were in very, very poor condition. They weren't funded properly. They weren't staffed properly. Awful things were happening, and the institution.
Can you give us some examples of how poor the conditions were?
Yeah, people. This is the 40s, 50s, especially the 50s and 60s. These are the times when you hear stories of people hosing residents down to keep them clean. Well, when you look at the fact that there may have been one staff person for 60 residents, and I've interviewed these folks, they said, Ingrid, we had to keep people clean. What else could we do? I was the only one that took care of their bathing. I had 50 guys I had to attend to.
Right.
So, yeah, we had it was a hose and we hosed them down.
They had no recourse.
I said, I hope it wasn't cold water. And he said, oh, no, of course not. But get the soap in the bucket, throw it on the people, hose them down. People were clean. People didn't have bed sores. They were clean. But that was a bad thing. We didn't provide enough staff.
Right.
People weren't getting any treatment. They weren't getting any care. They weren't going to any programs. They weren't getting out of the buildings. They weren't getting out of the facility. And what's even worse than that, the Department of Mental Health was then in the medical model paradigm. And so these poor developmentally disabled folks, instead of being taught, many of them were being medicated in order to be controlled. And this is an egregious condition. And the parents got together and they said...
The parents of the residents.
The parents of the residents got together and they started to petition the court, and they started making a lot of noise because they wanted to correct this egregious condition.
And approximately what time period was this?
By the time the 70s rolled around, the parents were pretty aggravated, and one gentleman in particular, his name was Benjamin Ricci, he got a lawyer to work with him gratis for free, and slowly but surely they started putting pressure on the Commonwealth, and the Attorney General at the time, the Attorney Generals would defend the Commonwealth. And that's the Attorney General's job. They're supposed to defend the Commonwealth. So by defending the Commonwealth, they were defending these egregious conditions. And the interesting thing was, they never visited the facilities.
Wow. So they made a judgment based on no information, or practically no information.
In 1975, with Governor Dukakis, Attorney General Frank Bellotti was elected.
Frank Bellotti. Mm-hmm.
Frank Bellotti, I interviewed him for my book. He told me, he said, Ingrid, I toured the facilities. I was through those institutions. The conditions were unconstitutional. They were egregious. And he went on, and it was just horrible. He said, when I became Attorney General, I made up my mind. I closed the door, I took the phone off the hook, and I wrote a letter to Mike Dukakis. And I said, Governor, I cannot defend these egregious conditions existing in our state facilities at this time. I will not defend these conditions. At that point, the parents had impetus. Mr. Bellotti was the change agent. The parents came in, and a consent decree. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts went into a consent decree.
I see.
They basically said, okay.
So how many residents were there at this time? What size and what was the age range?
At Rentham at the time, well, for instance, Rentham was designed to have no more than 1,000, 1,500 maximum folks at its peak. In 1964, there were 2,400 people at Rentham. Oh my God! And they were hardly any staff at all. It was just horrible. In 1970, I can't remember when the consent decree, when all this stuff happened, but by the late 70s, changes were being made. The legislature was giving money. Money was pouring in. Buildings were being renovated. Staff were being hired. And this takes a long time. And this process, it takes years. You have these poor residents, these poor folks who were used to not getting any programming, not getting any training at all. Unfortunately, some folks being hosed down. And all of a sudden now there's this influx of staff, and they're great people, and they're starting all these programs. And these residents who they'd sit in their buildings in the day room most of the time, watching television. TV was on 24 hours, it seemed. And all of a sudden, we're asking them to go out, we're asking them to do this, we're asking them to do that.
Yeah.
But they didn't know how to respond, they didn't know how to act.
Yes.
It was a very, it was often very difficult, but very rewarding at the same time.
I see. So this seems like a good point for me to mention as you're talking about your interviews, that Ingrid has actually written a book. How many years ago, or when did you actually
It was published in 2014.
Okay, so just 2 years ago, really. From one century to the next. It really is a study of the state's Rentham's system for developmental disabilities and for adults. And in particularly focusing on the history of the notion of eugenics, which we'll talk a little bit earlier, and about how the model changed through the consent decree that Ingrid is referring to in the 70s. I think at this point it would be good for us to make the distinction between mental, or what we normally know as mental health disorders, and what are developmental disabilities as they're defined.
And this was one of the problems and one of the collateral results of Mr. Bellotti's consent decree. Prior to the, we would love to call it, and in fact it is heroic reform of the 70s, the developmentally disabled folks were just under this umbrella of Department of Mental Health. Mm-hmm. After the consent decree, the Department of Mental Health sort of split. And from that emerged the Department of Mental Retardation. Mm-hmm.
Prior to developmental disabilities.
Since then, it's called the Department of Developmental Services, because the euphemism mirrors, it's a negative connotation that mirrors society's view at the time. Mm-hmm. The word idiot is horrible, but that was what we called intellectually and developmentally disabled folks. And then it went to this and that, and these were actually medical terms. And then it went to feeble-minded, which was sort of not too bad. And then it went to mentally retarded, and then it went to developmentally disabled, then intellectually and developmentally disabled. But it's the euphemism treadmill. We have to keep changing the word because we have to keep changing the word because of the connotation.
And it denigrates
the negative connotation.
Human
so when we can stop changing the words, we're going to be okay. But the Department of Mental Health broke in two, and the Department of Mental Retardation came about. Mm-hmm. But there was a big paradigm shift at this time because the parents were concerned that within the Department of Mental Health, we have what was called the medical model.
Right.
So you give people drugs to change their behavior because they may have a psychiatric diagnosis. But this isn't helping the developmentally disabled folks who they're not going to have a so-called recovery because they're developmentally disabled. Mm-hmm. They would benefit from programs and training and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But instead, the medical model said, no, we're going to control your behavior by giving you medication. The parents were appalled.
Yes.
Plus, there wasn't enough staff.
Right.
So the medical model was bad, very bad for intellectually and developmentally disabled folks. So it went to what we now call the multiple disciplinary model. Mm-hmm. Okay, so many disciplines together: psychology, social work, recreation, rehabilitation, OT, PT, AP, all that stuff. The multidisciplinary model, and that's what we currently have. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. The paradigm shift occurred in the mid to late 70s with the IDD, Department of Mental Retardation, now DDS. The paradigm shift in DMH eventually happened. DMH went from the medical model, which they clung to for an awful long time. That was their answer. Okay, we'll give you this, we'll give you that.
Take a pill.
Take a pill. Okay. Yeah. Well, the DD.
Of course, it helped with case management too.
The IDD people, the parents, everyone could see to break away from that, but the mental health folks were still stuck in that model. So around 2003, 2006, we had a paradigm change in the Department of Mental Health, and it went from the medical model to the recovery model, which means we have in us an ability to recover. We're going to try not to over-medicate folks. We're going to try to get them into the community and all that sort of stuff. I don't need to go on and on about paradigms.
No, that's okay. I still want to get a handle for our audience to talk about some examples of developmental disability or what defines it. My understanding, again, doing the research, is that a developmental disability, correct me if I'm wrong, is something that would occur typically at birth or early on, before the age of 22, for example. And autism, for example, would be one example.
You're born with a developmental disability.
Okay.
If you're 22 years old or 42 or whatever, and you're involved in a car accident, or you have some sort of an accident, you get brain damage, that's different. But that's not developmentally disabled.
Right.
Folks who are developmentally disabled, it happens before they're born or during the birthing process, or they're deprived of oxygen or some awful thing, or the mother
like
did
spina bifida or something like that.
Or whatever. A lot of these folks are also multiply physically handicapped or have some other issues going on other than just the intellectual disability.
Right. And it's likely that, my understanding is that it's also considered that they are likely not to recover from whatever illness they're born with, but they can still recover power. And
you can be empowered.
Exactly.
You can be empowered. You can be self-determined.
Right.
You can be accepted by your community, which is the most important thing. You can have folks as role models. You can eventually be a role model yourself for other people. The mental health folks, see, we have to also understand that if you're intellectually and developmentally disabled, you could also have a diagnosis, I hate to use these clinical terms, of you could have mental health challenge as well.
Right.
You could have anxiety. You could, especially if you were in a facility, you could have anxiety. You could have depression. You could be paranoid. You could have other psychiatric conditions accompanying your your developmental disability, and that's an awful hard thing for somebody to try to emerge from and try to work with.
Right.
And these folks have incredible challenges, but they just come through it so well. Many of them, it's just wonderful.
I've visited the center and I've seen some of the residents, and they are really inspiring in many of the things that they can do. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the new models, some of the new approaches, and some of the therapeutic techniques that you're using now that are helping to empower the residents.
Over the last 35 years, I have seen so much progress, so much forward movement. It's a different world today, absolutely different world. It's a wonderful, Rentham is a wonderful place. It's a wonderful place to be.
So now there are about close to 300 residents?
We have 274 folks, I think, which is, thankfully we don't have 2,400 like we did in 1964, right. But a lot of these folks also went out to community homes. But
oh, you mean like a resident facility as opposed to being in the institution?
Yeah,
is that what you mean?
We want to get people. We want to get people out into the community and be accepted in their community. But the wonderful programs we have, the ones that I'm personally involved with, we have religious programs, spiritual programs. Mm-hmm. I do a Catholic Mass, and it's volunteer assisted. Mm-hmm. We actually even have volunteer priests come in. We have families from the community.
Volunteer from the residents.
Yes. Yeah. We have families from the community coming in to attend our Catholic Mass and to assist our people. And it's great. We children, young people, teenagers, children, some folks have brought in babies and bassinets. I mean, this is just a wonderful experience. Everyone is a stakeholder. Everyone's on even ground.
Right.
It's not one person looking down at another.
I see.
Everyone's looking eye to eye. Yeah. It's fantastic. We have special masses for the residents, special masses for the staff, special masses for the volunteers. We have religious programs that include a monthly Jewish program run by volunteers also.
Right.
We have a wonderful Protestant Sunday morning worship service. We have animal facilitated therapy.
Oh, that's interesting.
We have
what kind of animals?
We have all sorts.
This gets back to what I hinted at earlier.
Well, we started with canines, and we have a feline. We have a cat, Rocky the cat.
Oh.
my area of expertise was the equine facilitated therapy, because from 85 to 90, I ran a therapeutic riding program for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
And I recently developed my small farm as an equine facilitated therapy site. So we've got residents coming in to my farm to sit, to hang out, to be with volunteers, to pet the horses, to feed the horses horse cookies. We've used it as an anti-anxiety thing. I mean, it's my own anti-anxiety thing. When I come home from work, I like to sit out and look at the horses. So it's just a very relaxing, normal thing. And again, I can't stress the fact that we're bringing people in from the community. We're bringing volunteers and families in from the community.
Right.
I also started a partnership with a local community college. They call it there's a pet-assisted therapy program, several classes and certifications that they run. Beautiful program.
So this is an internship or
and
certification
we're starting to do
for students?
internships at Rentham.
Oh,
And
great.
It's fantastic. We're going to use dogs for the most part, but bringing these...
So college students in special ed,
Yeah.
listen in on this.
Yeah, we're looking for volunteers for these programs and for our religious programs. And I didn't mention a peer support program.
Oh, yes, tell us about that. You did mention that when we talked over the phone.
I started a pilot peer support program because the peer support program initially came directly from the paradigm shift in DMH, which went from the medical model to the recovery model. And basically, it's a peer... it's somebody with lived experience of a mental health challenge helping somebody who's still facing those challenges to work through them and to support them, and also to get that person into the community. So I developed a pilot program, peer support program at Rentham with our folks. And it was great. It's just like bringing one-to-one volunteers in to nurture and support our population.
Right. So can you give me an example just of perhaps one resident and one person that's outside of the community who has the mental health challenge that is working with one of your... Can you give us an idea of what that encounter and what that relationship is like?
I think I understand your question. I trained a fellow to be a peer support specialist for our program, and his challenge was he had without going into too much detail, he had a serious physical illness. He was in a coma and all that.
I see.
And he had a problem with he now has to wear just supports on his wrists, which is no problem, but he was working with a lady who's in a wheelchair, and she just sits down next to her, looks at her, and eye to eye, same level. He brings his iPad in, and she uses the iPad. They talk.
Nice.
We go on wheelchair walks. He brings her to special events and chats with her. And she told him that she knows. Oh, don't leave me. I want you to visit. And she held his hand with the brace on it. It was just like, we're not all perfect.
They made a connection.
Yeah, we're not all perfect.
Right.
And each and every one of us, some of us may not be so brave and we may conceal our imperfections, but it helps us to connect with other people.
Right.
If they can see somebody who's had a challenge, has overcome the challenge, and it sort of inspires them. I think they think, well, maybe I can do it too.
Right.
Yeah, if you can't run, you can walk. If you can't walk, you can do something else. But at least you can try to move forward. We need to move forward on our journey, and we need to support each other just to move forward. It may be a tiny increment. It may be by leaps and bounds. But as long as we're moving forward in a supported way, and that's the whole thing behind the peer support. You can do it. I've been there. I did it. You can do it. Come on, let's do it together.
That's great.
It's great. It is.
So how often or how much of a commitment do these people outside of the community make toward the residents?
It varies with how they're with the schedules that they wrestle with. We all have stuff to do. Let's face it, we all have stuff to do, and it varies. If somebody has an hour a week that'd be fantastic. If they've got
So about an hour a week.
yeah, if
would
they
be
got
good.
if they got 2 hours a week, that's even better. If they have 4 hours a week, beautiful. But it's completely individual.
Right, I see.
And up to them.
So it sounds like what you're saying, the peer-to-peer program and the other kinds of therapeutic modalities that you offer are very customized to whatever the residents' needs are?
We want to treat each person as an individual.
I see.
We design a program around you, what you like, what you want to do, the things you want to do. The horse facilitated therapy program that I started, when I see some of the people during the week that are in the program, they look at me and say, when are we going back to your house? Or horse. They look at me and they say horse. I mean, and they smile. That's a good thing.
Right,
you know?
Right.
So if you liked horses, I mean, I know you like cats.
And I do.
I know you like cats. So
but I can't ride them.
We would do I bring the therapy cat to you first.
Yeah.
And if you were good with that, we'd bring the therapy cat. Then we'd introduce the therapy dog. And if you were really into animals, I think, wow, that's really good. You could come to see the horses.
Okay.
You know, or if you like to go to the movies, or if you want to learn to cook, or if you like to sing, or if you just like being outside listening to music, whatever you like, we would try to help you, to support you to do that.
Right.
A lot of our people love to go to our religious programs,
Right.
Which is a really wonderful thing to see. And the good thing is we have so many people in from the community. We have to bring people in from the community, and that way they can see, they can see the beauty of our folks, and they can see the beauty of their folks, and we're all together. We're all in this together. So we need to bring the community in. We don't want our population to be devalued. Right. We can't let that happen. That has happened. We can't let it happen. The mental health community is devalued. We can't allow these people to be devalued. So we bring the community in. The community can see, whoa, these people have value. They certainly do. Right. And then they become part of the community. They become accepted by the community. I mean, I didn't want to work with the population initially because of my perception of that population, because of the community that I grew up in. Mm-hmm. We need to change that. Right. We need to show the community that, our population shouldn't be devalued. Right. So we just have to get the community in. We have to get our people into the community, pull the community in. Right. We can't be separate. Mm. We've got to tear the walls down. No building. No building walls. I don't want to. No walls. This is a very political thing right now. It's no walls. I'm afraid to say it. I don't want my tires to get slashed. No. Right. Well, it sounds like what you're saying, Ingrid, is that, and I know that you would agree with this, is that every human being has worth. Absolutely. All of these people are residents of the state. They have as much right to happiness in their lifestyle, to access to facilities that they can in fact use, and we as fellow citizens should take it upon ourselves to make sure that their life can be as optimally satisfactory as we can do for ourselves. Yes, right? and you have to realize now, fortunately, we've got a lot of our people in the community. Right. Rentham is one of only 2 existing facilities in the Commonwealth. Right. But the people at Rentham are there because they want to be. But it's the largest one, though, right? Yes, it is. Yeah. The people at Rentham are there because they want to be. Their families and guardians want them to be. Oh, that's an important point. Yeah, I think. I see what you're saying. This is. We're not talking about bad institutions. The era of the bad institution is gone. Right. We just need to make sure that it doesn't come back. We need to be vigilant. But right now, we have good institutions, and those 2 words together are kind of hard to swallow for a lot of folks because of the awful history that we've had. Right. But we have a lot of folks that are in community houses and in community settings now. Right. So I want the audience to know that we don't have that many folks in facilities. Right. A lot of our folks are still in the community. And the goal is to bring them out to the community. But they're in the community in group homes, and unfortunately a problem we're having is that they're really not being accepted into the community. Right. So whether you're in a humongous facility or a little group home in the community, we still need to change the attitude of the community so that they accept our population. Right.
Right, I see. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, we talked about the change, the paradigm shift and the change in the models. And I know that the early negative history came from this concept of eugenics. And you address that a lot in your book. I was hoping that you could define that for us and talk about where we've come from
It's a huge subject, but I'll try to touch upon it a little bit.
Sure.
And first of all, when I look at this, I see a huge timeline. And eugenics is a relatively recent thing. The term eugenics, Sir Francis Galton coined in his book that he published in 1883, Human Faculties, or something like that. I apologize for not being able to remember. And basically what it was about was the science of breeding stock. The bad thing is humans were the stock. And so we've got 1883.
So he was using this analogy
Francis
of stock
Galton
and
in
human
1883 writes this book about the selective breeding of stock of humans, which is sort of scary. Charles Darwin would happen to be his cousin, but anyway. So we got 1883,
It's an interesting relationship
it
there.
It sort of is, but so around 1900, it hits, and eugenics spreads like wildfire. And what happened in this country and what happened in Massachusetts is that people were afraid that people who were then, we have to call them feeble-minded, that's what they called them then.
Back at that was the level, yeah.
That these feeble-minded people were going to, I hate to say these words, hear them coming out of my mouth, these feeble-minded people are going to ruin our gene pool and destroy our society, and our culture is going to go to hell in a handbasket. People really believed this.
Right.
This is frightening. So in order to protect society from these feeble-minded people, they built state schools.
Right.
We had state hospitals, which dealt with folks with mental health challenges, and now we have state schools. State schools were specifically for the feeble-minded. And
that would
very, very
equate to the developmental disabilities.
Yeah, so in
I see.
The very first, the institutional system was very well intended. I mean, great people started it, great people. The problem was it sort of got corrupted, and I have to blame society. I like to blame society. So the state schools started being built. The school in Waltham was the first, and that was 1848. That was pre-eugenics. That was just people trying to do a good thing. That was a good Samaritan. They want to get these feeble-minded people off the street. Unfortunately, they called them idiots then. They want to get these
Were
folks...
they actually on the streets? I mean, were these
they
people
were on the
homeless
streets.
and abandoned?
They were on the streets.
So
they were in jails. They were in poor farms. They were in workhouses. So it was good to get these folks. It was wonderful to get these folks off the street,
and this is here in New England with difficult winters
get them
and everything
housing,
else. Yeah.
and try to train them a skill, teach them a skill, try to train them to do some work.
I see.
That was in 1848. Now we have eugenics. Now by 1910, the state school in Waltham is horrible things are happening there. They're horribly overcrowded. Rentham was officially open in 1910. The second one was Belchertown in 1923, I believed. And then we have
in the western part of
Belchertown was in the western part of the state. And then there was Dever. But the bad thing that happened, people were being put in these facilities to save society. So we have a change. Instead of the institutions being created to help people and protect people, now the institutions are protecting society from the institutionalized rather than protecting the institutionalized from society. So we've gone,
interesting.
Yeah, so we've gone from a really good thing to a really bad thing. And then we clawed our way out of that.
So what kind of people were being, I'm assuming that what you're suggesting is that people were misselecting or choosing certain kinds of people to they were just sending them.
If you were considered feeble-minded, you would be sent to a state school. It was really, really like that. It got to the point, and Rentham was the first place to have nurseries. It got to the point where babies were being sent to the state schools.
Wow.
by the 30s, and the first nurseries were built in Wrentham. The first nursery was built in 1930, was constructed. If you were a family at that time and you had a child that was not perfect, the medical folks, your doctor, your family doctor, very well-intentioned doctor would tell you, you know, little Susie isn't, we think she's mentally retarded. So you're not going to be able to care for her.
Like someone with Down syndrome, for example.
That was, they called that Mongolism.
Yes.
Because they didn't understand it. They didn't understand it. So so you would think you were doing the right thing by sending your baby.
Right. And that was
to
part
a
of the
facility.
medical model at that time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the physicians
in
were
transition,
that's how we got so many folks in these state schools in the
first place. I see.
The parents were being told to put their
that this
child
is the right
there.
thing to do.
Yeah. Well, it ended up, look at the horror it created. But fortunately, we don't do that anymore. We haven't done that for quite some time.
Yeah.
But that's how our state schools got filled. And obviously, it wasn't just Massachusetts. This is happening all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of these folks a lot of folks were so multiply physically handicapped, but they weren't intellectually
handicapped. Yeah.
But they were, and a lot of people were
Such
behavior
a shame.
problems.
Yeah.
And they were sent to the state school.
So just if somebody was a
punishment.
behavior problem and they didn't have the methods of diagnoses that they have nowadays, so people were probably mislabeled or just
And then
trouble in the classroom.
Even if you have normal intelligence, you become institutionalized. So say you were placed in a facility for some reason in 1948. Well, you're perfectly normal, you're intelligent and all that sort of stuff. But if you grew up, if you grew up institutionalized in an institution, your speech may not be right. Your ambulation,
That's true. There's an effect of being institutionalized in and of itself.
I mean,
that's true.
We have to, you would be institutionalized,
Right.
and it would take a long time for you to be educated and
be able to be brought back and empowered, which is what you're trying to do now in your therapy.
So anyway, that's why we can't take large groups of people and put them together.
Right.
Like the congregate. We do successful. It's called Congregate Care. That's the new euphemism for it.
I see. Congregate Care.
Congregate Care.
Yeah.
We do it successfully with. My mother lived in a senior housing place, and it was wonderful because she had everything at her fingertips. Doctors came in. There was a Catholic mass every week. They provided food if you couldn't get your own food, and that sounds like a good thing. And I used to go there. They had activities. I'd take her to places, but we have to be really careful when we put groups of people who are or may have a tendency to be devalued by society.
Right.
See, the elderly are devalued too, so you have to be really careful when you put them together in a congregate care system.
Yeah.
However, there can be advantages also.
Right.
But we don't want people to. We want if somebody's not normal, we want them to be with people who are. I hate to use the word normal.
Typical.
Typical. That's much better.
Yeah.
So that they can get your mannerisms, so they can see how you behave.
Socialize.
Socialize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be like regular people. Not. Right. So we don't want to take devalued people and put them all together in a bunch. Basically, that we found that doesn't work. We need to step away from that.
Right. Oh, thank you for that little travel back in history and eugenics, and it's so impressive to see where we are right now.
Yeah, the eugenics thing, luckily, after the end of World War II, the eugenics thing just went away. I think it's because, I know it's because we went into the concentration camps, and we freed those folks. And unfortunately, Adolf Hitler was a eugenics proponent.
Yes.
So after all that horror, it's suddenly, you never heard the word eugenics again.
Right.
It died.
Right.
But at that time, we still had people we still had people in these facilities.
Right.
Thousands
and they
of
had
people.
been institutionalized, so then what do you
and they were
do
initially
at that point?
put there because of the eugenics thing that it's now gone by. But even after that stopped, after World War II ended and we stopped doing the eugenics thing, babies were still being admitted. People were still being admitted. It was a habit. There were no services available. I interviewed many wonderful parents. They said, Ingrid, there were no services available in our community.
Right, what else
There
could
was
people
nothing
Yeah.
There was,
Yeah.
I couldn't keep Johnny in my house.
Right.
We couldn't do it.
Yes.
We weren't up to it. We couldn't do it. He was at risk. Our family was at risk. We just couldn't do it. There was no alternative.
And families were larger in those days too. So if you had 3 or 4, 5, 6 kids, and you had one who had special needs, who had muscular dystrophy, for example.
You would have to give all the. It just it didn't.
It was
didn't
very difficult.
Work.
Yeah.
There were no services available. We can give a sigh of relief now. We have the Department of Developmental Services. We have many services available now.
Right. Right. I have he's passed now, but I had a cousin who had some mental difficulties. He had 1 kidney, he had a heart defect, and I think he was tested with his IQ at around 80, 85. And I'm thinking that now he likely would have been mainstreamed.
Yeah.
Because he could definitely communicate well, he could do basic math, he could even play cards. Sometimes he even beat me at playing cards, actually. But I have to say that he was not institutionalized, but he had the option to be.
Thank
at
God
the time.
His
mom said, no, I just won't do that to him. And so I can completely understand, because they had other children, the amazing challenge and the difficult situation that it puts a family in when you have someone with, let's say, extraordinary needs compared to the other children in the family. You know, it can be very tough. But what I wanted to actually get back to in terms of the therapeutic techniques and the peer-to-peer program that you were talking about, we were talking about mental health issues that oftentimes people who have developmental disabilities, and I can certainly imagine this, might also have depression, might also have high anxiety issues. So can you tell us about how your peer-to-peer program and what other modalities address some of that in that population as we try to help bring them into the larger community?
We want to enhance, we want to encourage self-determination or self-initiation. We want to get...
What do you mean by that?
It's, okay, if I want you to self-initiate, or I want to grow some self-determination in you, I wouldn't say, okay, you have a choice. You can wear the blue shirt or the purple shirt today. That wouldn't really be self-determination. That would be making a choice. Just making a choice.
Right.
But if I said to you, well, what do you want to do, or where do you want to go today? Or if I brought you to a religious program and you walked up to the podium or you raised your hand, or you started saying prayers or something, I would want to encourage that. It was something that came from inside of you that was positive. I would want to encourage that. I would want to equip you. I would want to enable you with the confidence, or be the role model for you to go ahead and do that. You might like blue flowers. So you would go, if you're walking down the street and you see blue flowers, you may bend over and pick them up, and that'd be great. But if the blue flowers were in the middle of a busy highway, we may have to rethink that.
Right.
You know, but it's basically just helping you on your journey by somebody who's had their own challenges, and somebody who can perhaps relate to some of the challenges you're having. I say perhaps relate, somebody who definitely can relate. Somebody who's been there, somebody who has what we call lived experience.
Right.
And somebody who's been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and is pretty much helping to guide you on your way forward.
I see.
Now, with our population, it would be helping get people into the community integration, helping people do something in the community that they like, helping somebody express themselves in a certain way, or basically find their own path.
Right.
Not me steering you into a path. You trying to find your own path.
Kind of find yourself.
And be supporting you to that path. It's really hard when you look at an IDD population versus the mental health population. But we can do it. We can support that person. And I say just let's support that person. And let's get that person in the community and doing something that they feel good doing.
Right.
You know.
I see what you're saying. So
I'm sure I'm not doing it justice, but...
Well, what I want to understand is that those are the special aspects of the peer-to-peer program where people can be like a muse or a mentor or provide reinforcement when a person does express themselves or draws or sings or strokes whatever it is that they're doing. What kinds
Pats
of
a
things?
Horse.
Right.
I mean, just patting a horse, a
So
1,000-pound animal.
So if they're not doing that as part of the peer-to-peer program, if you want to expose and empower your residents to feel welcomed in the community, what other kinds of things does Rentham Development Center do to bring you into the community?
We bring volunteers in.
So it's mostly bringing volunteers in.
Bring volunteers into the community, and with the goal of having our folks also go out into the community. And we've done that.
How do you do that?
I'll tell you I haven't done this for a while, but several years ago, we actually had a Catholic women's program, a Catholic women's group, and I had some Catholic volunteers and some Catholic residents, and we went out to local parishes. We visited a different parish each time, and then we'd go out and have lunch or dinner afterwards. We'd have ice cream if it was summertime, and we just socialize. We may go to a concert and listen to music, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But we have to be careful. We don't bring a van. We don't want to bring a van load with 10 people and infiltrate an area. We need to do it sort of more on a one-to-one.
So more on a one-to-one basis. Bring someone in with a wheelchair into a library, for example, or a grocery store. But having a van or something like that where you have half a dozen people,
the whole
you would
van
avoid
thing,
that.
Because what happens, and people
what's
have
your
the best
experience
intentions.
with that?
Okay. And the volunteers have taught me a lot because I've sort of been institutionalized myself, but the volunteers from the community have taught me a lot. We went into a restaurant after we had Catholic Mass, and the hostess was very nice, I thought, and she walked up to us and she said, "Would you like to go in the back room there so no one will disturb you?" So my first thought was, "Oh yeah, that's nice." Oh no. One of the volunteers said, "No, absolutely do not put us in the back room.
Right.
We want to sit in the middle of the restaurant." Well, they sat us in the middle of the restaurant.
Right.
And when she said that, it made me think back when I was a child, misbehaving and being sent to the special education class, which happened to be in the basement.
More punitive.
So even I, who should know better, I took my lesson from the community volunteer.
Right.
I thought, okay, lesson learned, never let that happen again.
Right.
And the community, once the community makes an effort and wants to work with you, the community will show us what to do. I organize a Catholic Mass, and one of the volunteers came up to me, gosh, it must be 20 years ago now. He said, "Ingrid, how come you don't have a refreshment table at my Catholic Mass in my town? After Mass, we have a socialization and we have refreshments and everything." I looked at him, I said, "Well, I'm afraid to have food here. It'll distract our people. They won't want to pay attention to Mass." Now, who's being institutionalized?
Right.
The volunteer was appalled. This was 20 years ago. I've progressed since then.
So you have a snack table now, I hope?
The volunteer was appalled. I read his expression. I got it. He said, "Ingrid," he said, "you're not going to even give your people a chance?" I said, "I'm so embarrassed. Let's do it."
Right.
I said, "We'll do it next week." Oh, we've had no problem.
Yeah.
And it's so wonderful. We've been doing it for decades now. It's so wonderful because after Mass, the volunteers and the staff and the residents all sit together and have snacks.
Right.
And it's wonderful. But again, I took my cue from one of the volunteers from the community.
Right, right.
Not only are they teaching me how to interact appropriately, but they're also teaching our population.
Right.
See, it's a wonderful win-win thing.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think what I'd want to stress here is that although some of these community involvement opportunities come around a spiritual issue of, for instance, the Catholic Mass, the opportunity it just turns out to be a unique. We're not pushing necessarily anyone toward a faith, but what it does is it allows for people to come together with the community. People from the town, neighbors come, family members of the residents come. Other people come and help out with the Mass. There is an organ player. There are priests from Boston College, one of the Jesuit priests who comes and does Mass, and he, in a lovely way, I have to say, he has the reputation of, he has a new name. He's called Father Fast, because he actually can cut back on the scripture reading and his homily so that it's adjusted for the membership at the Rentham Center, and they love him. And people can sing if they choose to. They can volunteer. They can bring up those. So it opens up a wonderful venue for people to participate, as I imagine the other religious services and the other kinds of activities with the pets and others do for these residents.
I'm glad you mentioned that spiritual aspect, Karen, because I follow no organized religion, and I do support these programs, but the important thing is it's more of a social gathering. Yeah. It's spiritual, but it's more of a social gathering. Mm-hmm. I don't want to take away from its spirituality. Right. But it's just wonderful to see people coming together in that way. Yes. It's really nice. It's a really nice thing. Mm-hmm. And it's got the music component. You mentioned our organist. She's our pianist. She has been coming to Rentham since 1955, and her son was a volunteer at Rentham. Oh, interesting. Her grandchildren have now become volunteers at Rentham. That's wonderful. And quite often, that's beautiful. Quite often her son will come with his children. So we've got 3 generations of volunteers. Wow. I mean, these are the sort of relationships that we nurture, and these are the sorts of things that are just really rewarding, and they're great. And it's just a bunch of good people coming together.
That's great. That's really wonderful. So as we reflect back on these approaches and opportunities for the residents and the therapeutic approaches, the Mass venues, the pet therapy and peer-to-peer, what other things do you see on the horizon for this population? What can we do as citizenry of Massachusetts, to help push this further?
We have to foster the self-determination thing, and we have to not devalue people. We have to accept folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities or challenges into our communities. We need to invite folks to concerts or movies or gatherings or whatever. But if we see people, we need to not step away from them. Or if they come into our restaurant, we need to not say, do you want to sit in the back room? It's private. We need to just think and make sure that we're not devaluing.
Have a little more empathy.
Yeah, and if the opportunity presents itself where we get a chance to work with some of these folks or hire them or have them work or whatever, we just need to do that. And we always have to keep in our mind, let's not devalue this person. Let's give this person a chance. The way we look at people our own personal headset, it's so determined by the way we ourselves have been nurtured. And I use myself as an example. And we just have to stop and think before we react. We need to stop and think. Rather than react, we need to respond and move forward so we can all do it together.
Wonderful.
It's just, we need to all do it together. Right. It has to be okay, come on everybody, you're this, you're that, you're this. Let's all come together. We're all moving forward together. We're all going to support each other. And
it sounds like more research needs to be done in this area to develop more effective yet customized programs because of the population, more opportunities, and
we're doing that.
More optimism.
Now. Yeah. Well, the recovery model in DMH is really, really exciting. And in DDS, we're developing new ways of looking at things. Even as I speak, trainings are going on, programs are being developed, different things are happening. So as we speak, good things are happening in the Department of Developmental Services. As we speak, great programs are being initiated, new things. we are moving forward, and we can continue to move forward as long as we keep in the back of our mind, we need to be vigilant.
Right.
Because we don't always intend, these eugenics folks didn't really intend to be bad. They thought they were doing the right thing.
Right.
But before you know it, you've got this horror show. You've got this
Right.
egregious situation that
Right.
we have to, now we've got to fix it.
Right.
So let's not let it happen again.
Let's definitely not let it happen again.
No, we do not want to go backwards.
Right.
But we just have to be vigilant.
Right.
I would ask everyone to please be vigilant
Right.
and make sure
And
that
supportive and accepting.
and supportive and accepting of folks, and try not to devalue any specific group of people, because that's when you start getting into that scary stuff.
Okay. Well, we don't want any more scary stuff.
No more.
So I want to thank you for being our guest today. That was really wonderful to give us that sense of history about Massachusetts, about mental health, developmental disabilities, the whole field of eugenics. And I think we got almost all of that done in 30 minutes. So thank you again, Ingrid. It's so
Karen,
wonderful to have
much.
you.
I appreciate you having me, and thank you again.
And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show.